And I think it's helpful for coaches to remember that you are modeling what you want your athlete to be able to do with how they manage it, right? So if we are at these extremes with being super happy after a win, super upset after a loss, we're also not modeling great, emotion regulation strategies for how you manage that, right?
Hey, welcome to another Coaching You podcast with the coach Brendan Suhr, presented by Noah Basketball. I think you're really going to enjoy today's guest, Dayna Charbonneau, the sports psychologist of the Toronto Raptors. We had her in Las Vegas at our flagship event in July. She knocked it off the court. She was incredible. She is really one of the best in the field. You'll see her personality is incredible. But her teaching, her points that can help you immediately as a coach, it's really timely that you're in season now to have this. And I think we'll all agree the performance of your players has so much to do with what's up here as opposed to the plays you're designing for them. Two things that Zach and I want to make sure that you have as giveaways. Number one, he's provided in our show notes a link for our 12 Days of Christmas. It's one of our annual things, our best clinics of the year, 12 best clinics, one per day. Love them. Enjoy the heck out of them. The second one is our new Give and Go newsletter. Tremendous response. All you have to do is opt in. You give us your email, and now all of a sudden, every morning, it will be in your inbox to start the day off bright and early with an incredible play, one that you can watch the video of the play as it was executed. The second thing is a diagram that Zach has done. It's absolutely flawless. It makes you understand exactly how the play works. And then you have the ability to print it out. Something for your library. Totally free for you people that are in our community of Coaching You. So I enjoy it. Go to the show notes. And then after this quick timeout from our sponsors, we'll be back with Dayna Charbonneau from the Toronto Raptors. Noah Basketball is our new presenting sponsor of our Coaching You podcast. Noah Basketball is a shot tracking and data company that has helped change how coaches and players perfect the game's most important skill, shooting. Noah is a data service provider that uses machine learning and the latest computer vision technology to provide real-time data and feedback to improve shooting accuracy and consistency for professional and amateur basketball players. Noah has now analyzed over 570 million shots from countless high school, hundreds of college teams, and 28 NBA franchises. The technology is simply amazing. Once the system has been installed, players will be able to get immediate feedback on their shooting arc, left and right positioning, depth, makes or misses, and makes the data available to players and coaches on your mobile device. For more information about how Noah can help your team, visit noahbasketball.com. So excited to be back with our guest, Dayna Charbonneau, the sports, I don't call you a sports psychologist. I want to call you a performance coach. I want to tell you that you're the one that's getting everything done for Darko and the boys up there in Toronto on an incredible turnaround year. Welcome to the show. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
You know, when you came and spoke at our Coaching You Live event in Vegas this summer when your teammate Pat Delaney was there, I just thought it added so much value to us because I've always been someone that believed, and you'll talk about it later on when you talk about a three-legged stool. But, people think that coaching is all about what I call the science of coaching, and that being, getting the players skill-wise ready, getting the schemes and the tactics, as you call them, all that stuff. The science also, the science of nutrition, sleep, and stuff is added in the medical parts. But I think the biggest area that I have found in coaching today at the college and professional level is really what I call the people part of it. and it's the sports psychology area. I've seen so many great players, and I've had 27 players that I've coached that are in the Naismith Hall of Fame. And every one of those people, every one of those guys had problems during their career while I was coaching, probably because of me. They had problems, they had to get by me. And, but I found out that everyone, no matter how good you are, needs help. They need a coach to help them in that area. So how did you get started doing this?
It's a great question. I always knew I was interested in psychology. And a lot of sports psychology folks, our journeys are pretty nonlinear because there's not always a lot of programs specific to this that, you start and you go to one program and then you advance on and then you get a clean cut job right away. It doesn't usually go that way. So it wasn't really until I was in grad school, and I actually went to grad school for clinical psychology. So I wanted to help folks struggling with any kinds of mental health concerns. But I was an athlete growing up, so I was always interested in what I experienced growing up as an athlete and how I could kind of fuse the two worlds together. And so it wasn't until grad school that I really realized, wow, I want to be what I didn't have growing up as an athlete, because I was someone who would struggle under pressure or who would make multiple errors if I got in my own head after the first one. Even though I could still perform at a high level, there was definitely something missing there that I could have used a lot of support, both on and off the field, just having someone to talk to about other stuff that was going on in my life too. So in grad school, I would really found a way to start a kind of blazing my own trail and finding sports psych supervisors who would help me kind of get access to working with some athletes from a mental health and mental performance perspective. And then I had to kind of find internships, postdoc opportunities, that kind of set me up for my first interviews. And I ended up working as the first full-time person in the athletics department at West Virginia University. That was my first big kid job. Where I was able to, and I was one of those, I guess, first people who had to kind of be one person in the department taking care of, 15 plus teams and 400 plus athletes. And so we really got a sense of how overwhelming it can be when you only have one person providing that service.
Wow.
So I love to see how far we've come since then. There's a lot of programs that have 5, 6, 7 staff members available for the whole department. And now we're seeing a lot more folks integrated into our pro sports teams. So it's been great to see how far we've come. And now having a lot of the athletes that we come in at the pro level who have already had exposure to someone like me in college. And so that stigma has dramatically changed over time too.
With the Raptors, you have a great organization from top to bottom, and you have terrific coaches who are supportive of what you're doing. And that's one of the key things, right? Is that the coaches got to buy in also that to who you are and that you're an asset, not a liability to them. Because old-fashioned coaches, they don't want anyone else to screw up their team. They're doing a fine job by themselves, Yeah. And so I think that makes the whole thing when your front office and your coaches are supportive of you and the help you're giving, just like you're another coach, how beneficial is that?
So beneficial. And I mean, when I worked in college athletics and we had multiple teams, you would have such a variety in terms of which coaching staff had, and to some older school coaches, credit, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And if you've never had access to working with someone, you just don't know what that looks like. So some folks who have chosen to work with certain teams where maybe they're going to have to lay more groundwork of kind of really meeting a coach where they're at and helping them kind of implement things just from a small way as you go. Whereas, I was at a point in my professional career where I wanted to get to a team that from the top down, there was already things in place in the environment where I knew it would be a smoother transition and I'd really get to be integrated and see just how much I could help influence the entire organization. And so I was grateful that Toronto had already had that in place.
How does a professional coach like yourself integrate yourself with the players? How does it start? Does it start out with one-on-one meetings? Does it start out with talking to the group as a whole, telling them, here's the services, this is what I'm going to try to help you with, and then one-on-ones? How does it go about it now?
I think it's both. And I think it does depend on just the individual's personality too, I think, or what they think is successful. But I also think when we have things built into the environment proactively, that also really helps. So when I joined the Raptors, I actually joined halfway through the season. So that was a little atypical. So to your point, we did have, in the hope, I remember we were on the road, I think on the West Coast, and we were in the hotel, and Darko kind of in the meal room introduced me to the team. And then I gave a bit of a spiel, and my whole goal for that second half of the season was just building relationships, because we didn't really get time to build out a program of what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. So I just really prioritized just being present, being available, being a constant source of support as I built those relationships. But for the next season, when we did have time to plan over the summer, go into training camp, one thing that we also do in the college space that we do in the pro space is when athletes come in before training camp, they get their physical done from a medical perspective, right? They also have a time to meet with me where we talk more about mental health history, mental performance history. We can start helping them understand who I am, how to use me, set some initial maybe goals on what they would want in terms of my services or things that they're thinking of them for themselves at that point in time. And so then it establishes kind of that early touch point that we can continue kind of maintaining as we go forward.
The head coach is so important, as I stressed earlier. And Darko Rajovic, a Serbian-born coach who's been a friend of mine for nearly 20 years, is so good. And I can only picture myself being a global coach, that I've coached games in foreign countries. I can only imagine how, if I was in Serbia, I would be lost. I would be lost. I can't speak a word. I can go to different countries, even China, and speak a little bit of language. I can go to Russia and speak a little. Serbia, I'm totally lost. But this guy comes to the States, and the guy is incredible. I mean, he's one of our speakers that we use. He's just an incredible communicator, but he loves people. And I think that's one of the big things. He understands how people perform at their best. And that's what I love about him.
Yeah, and it's great to have, like you said earlier, coaches, front office, like all aligned with that relationship building foundation and importance.
Yeah, Masai is one of our dear friends, also Bobby Webster, and that's so important, that vertical alignment to and to anything to be successful in any organization. If you with what you're doing, a lot of our audience are high school, college coaches. What are the biggest conversations that you think they're going to have with athletes at that level?
In high school, what are some of the
Yeah.
biggest conversations that you might have with your athletes? I mean, what you said earlier, right? It's not just about the sport. I mean, oftentimes you're having conversations with your athletes about things that are happening off the court too.
That affects performance more than their shot going in or not, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know that there's so much happening off the court that they could take onto the court. Um, to your point earlier, too, if you have a hard time moving on from the game, then you're going to take that into your life off the court, too. So I just always really appreciate when coaches do invest that time early on just to get to know your players. You don't even have to talk about the sport, right? And you'll learn just in hearing about your players and seeing how they are with their family, seeing how they take initiative with their schoolwork. And like those kinds of skills are also going to be applied to how they are as a player for you too, right? And as a teammate and things like that. So you're gathering so much helpful information and then helping them feel like they can trust you and how you care about them, and just helping them feel even more comfortable highlighting what they can do on the field, on the court, whatever their sport is.
So pandemic wise, 21, whatever it was, seems like a century ago. But the big problem with athletes that I've heard, high school, college, etc., but even pros, became loneliness, right? And there's some of us that thrive. Like if I don't have interaction with humans every day, not by texting, but by talking to them or seeing them, I struggle. Okay. How big is loneliness, friendships entered into the problem?
That's a great point. And I think it also just highlighted to us the importance of communication and like intentional communication. Like I remember, so during that time, yeah, I couldn't physically see some of my friends, but did we make an effort to be creative and jump on a virtual call and kind of have more of those opportunities to connect in different ways? But then when you're not right beside them, it's almost like you have to learn how to communicate differently and maybe be a little bit more vulnerable in what you're sharing. And when I think of loneliness, there's the physical loneliness, but there's also loneliness sometimes in like you can be in a room with all of your teammates, but do you actually have those intentional, like vulnerable, deeper conversations where you can truly connect? Because you can feel lonely even when you're around a bunch of people, right? So I think that's something that I also really try and help our coaches when they're building relationships with their athletes, but also when I'm doing team sessions with our athletes or we're building our foundation of togetherness and team cohesion, like actually challenging this idea that you can't be vulnerable or you can't share your feelings or you can't talk about emotions, because that's really what connects us and helps us feel less lonely, is if we're able to connect on that deeper level, in my opinion.
And men are the worst. They're the
I will challenge that though,
no,
because
no, no. They men don't want to see doctors in general. Okay, but
Mhm.
men, in the old days, or I shouldn't say the old days. A big problem is men don't want to be vulnerable to share their emotions. I cry when I see a commercial with a puppy in it or something. I
Right,
mean, like,
right. And
but
yeah,
uh,
I hate the fact that we have, as a society, socialized men in that way, because it's not that there's something like genetically different
yeah,
about men, right? And so to your point, it's like you're feeling behind the scenes, you're watching commercials and a tear is shedding. And so can we bring that more to the forefront and shift our society's expectations? And that's what I've really appreciated about working with the men's teams that I have, is we really try and shift that.
So you mentioned before you studied to be a clinical
Mhm.
psychologist, which was basically how all humans are messed up. Okay, that's okay. And I am a huge believer positive psychology.
Mhm.
Okay. And I've studied and really got to have expertise in positive psychology. I know what schizophrenia, and anxiety and depression. I know what a little bit of what those are. They scare me. But positive psychology, I'm really into. And I think as a coach, that's what I try to work with players and coaches with, because this problems of why the coaches are messed up, they then put it on their players. Okay. So coaches usually can't handle losing. The players figure it out quite well because they play a lot of games. They find out they lose, they don't die. Coaches
Right.
feel they die when they lose. And so when you're working with athletes and you're working with coaches who I think need more help sometimes than the players, I can say that as a coach. How do you deal with players, let's say, on different areas of, let's talk about basketball things, losing, poor performance, but and before just with them before we go to outside pressure, from spouse, significant other, parents, agents, the outside fans of coming down on them, social media, etc., which is a whole other thing of I've never read a mention in my life about what someone says about me. So I think everyone likes me because I've never read that, and other people go scour them, and
Right.
that's dangerous, I think. But talk about how you work with players on their performance and handling things like that.
No, it's a great question. I think, again, it goes back to what can we talk about individually, but also what do I help influence in our environment too? Because go back to thinking about, if you're working with a child, for example, in therapy, and you're working on some goals of how things can be better, if the home environment isn't great, it's only going to go so far, right? So that's where it goes back to, I also appreciate, how do our coaches talk about losing? How are our coaches talking to our team after we lose to help them feel more comfortable with the reset as well? But then one on one, I think it's really helpful, especially at this level when you have maybe a back-to-back game or you only have a game in between. We really can develop some skills and strategies for quickly reviewing maybe what went well and what you would wanted to go differently in the game. And also, being able to um, kind of close the book, so to say, on that and reset for the next time where you have those new goals in place and you're able to kind of look at that new game in a different lens. So, we talk about process over outcome a lot on our team. How do we focus on what we can control? Controlling the controllables is is something that
You're
we
right.
hear a lot, but there's a lot of truth to that. And like you said, there's outside noise, there's people saying what you should or shouldn't do. There's a lot of things that are outside of our athletes' control, depending on how much that noise increases at certain times for certain players. Maybe they have to set a boundary. Maybe there have been athletes who choose to not go on social media for a month or something like that in order to just focus on what they need to focus on. And that can be empowering to set that boundary for them. So I kind of help us think of, again, what are some skills and strategies that we can put in place proactively that help you move on, stay in the present moment as best as possible, stay focused on what you can control with your goals in mind, your specific goals in mind. So we're trying to view everything as a lesson to learn from versus something to get stuck on and to maybe overanalyze and ruminate on that's going to be unhelpful for you. But that takes some time and that takes some practice. So saying it once isn't necessarily going to mean that they just get it right away.
Sure. No, let's make believe that we're not talking about an NBA team, but we're talking about high school, college teams, that age group of 15 to 18 in high school and 18 to 22 or 23 in college. So these people are very, very young, and some of them have never experienced failure. They've
Right.
always been the best on their high school team. Now they go to college and they don't
Yeah.
even get in the game.
Right.
And they are terrific players. They got a scholarship to college. They don't get on the floor. They get on the court for 4 minutes or whatever. And now that's eating them up. But let's talk about the coaches. How, after a game, after a win, would you recommend that a coach handles his post-game talk after a win to help them? Because if you just love them that when they win and hate them when they lose, that's a tendency I see, even all the way up to the pro level, but not as much, very little in the pros, but mostly in college. How do you recommend that coaches handle post game? I think it's really important.
I agree with you. And I think it's helpful for coaches to remember that you are modeling what you want your athlete to be able to do with how they manage it, right? So if we are at these extremes with being super happy after a win, super upset after a loss, we're also not modeling great, emotion regulation strategies for how you manage that, right? Again, something that I do appreciate about Darko is he's pretty consistent with his growth mindset approach and having kind of a way to be a little bit even keeled after either a win or a loss. Like, of course, we've seen videos of him getting excited and he will celebrate as needed, but he will also quickly come back to like, okay, now we have to focus on this next game. And after a loss, sometimes you might expect an outburst or some kind of like different expression of emotion, but sometimes it's okay, here's how we just like didn't literally do what we needed to do tonight. We need to get back to practice tomorrow. We need to work on these specific things, but we need to flush it, because if we hold on to it too long, that's just going to play into the next game. So I think it does take a second for coaches, before they go right to their team. Do you need to do something to regulate yourself a little bit
Well,
in that?
that's good.
But to really come back to like, what is the message that I have for my players on a regular basis and how am I going to be consistent with that right now? Because if I'm preaching growth mindset, if I'm preaching process over outcome, and I'm only focused on the outcome after a loss, then I'm giving mixed messages to my players here, right? So I really have to focus on that process piece of trying to be as objective as possible, again, with here's what we just didn't do today. And if, and we have to learn what we need to do differently next time. And I think trying to be as consistent with that is kind of my best advice.
You mentioned a great word, modeling. And I think what I see with coaches, and and I always say the skill set you need for coaching is the same skill set you need for parenting. And usually we model if you're a parent, you end up copying your mom or dad, the way you parent your kids. And that can be great. Many times it's not good because the way you parent kids nowadays is totally different than the way when I grew up.
Right.
You make one mistake, they whipped your ass. Okay. And, that's not really a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
You don't bring home A's, then you're dumb. That is not it, So, I think a lot of coaches, they model themselves after someone that they
Mm-hmm.
coach them.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And coaching in the last 80 years and I've studied, is going through. You have so many coaches that are teaching things that are like 30, 40, 50 years old.
Right.
And that's bad. I mean, because you know what? I have a cell phone. I don't have a rotary phone, and I don't go to a phone booth if I got to make a call.
Right.
Kids
Good
don't
point.
even know what a phone booth is.
Right.
And I think you have to keep adapting.
Yes.
So I think when you talk about this, how do you have one of the biggest problems is how do coaches handle, or how should they handle a player making a mistake during the game? I always say you have about 3 seconds to either destroy that kid or encourage him and boost him up and teach him. Which do you want to do? And it's so amazing how many of them destroy. How do you teach that?
It's a great point. And I mean, if you think about it, at the end of the day, in a game situation, you want your athletes to perform at their best, right? So if you were in their shoes, do you think you would perform at your best if you were just berated in that moment? And especially we forget the athletes know they messed up, right? They are high performing athletes too. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good if they didn't do something that they feel like they should have been able to do differently. So I agree with you. Can there be a middle ground sometimes in, treating them still like they know that there was a mistake that was made, but what's actually going to help them move on and actually going to increase the chance of them succeeding on the next play? It's probably not going to be tearing them down even more, especially when
Yeah. So I believe that if you have a second to teach them, in other words, if they made a mistake because they didn't do something right, teach them first, because I always assume when we don't do something well, it's my fault. I didn't teach it well enough. That's why we made it. Not because I'm not the great teacher if my students all get Fs in my class.
Sure.
Right. Sure. And so we have to accept responsibility. That's why I think coaching and playing has to be a collective responsibility between both. It's not when we win, I'm good. I'm the coach. I'm good. Look what a great coach I am. And when we lose, bad players,
I would honestly take it to like even another level too.
Please. Please.
As you're building your relationships with your players, you can also learn like what is the best way to approach them after a mistake. You might have a player that does want you to get on them. And if that's something that they think gives them a little bit of a boost or a little bit of an edge in that moment, then maybe that's something that actually could be helpful for that player. But maybe there's a player who needs you to give them a second and they need to take a deep breath on the bench before anyone can come and give that teaching moment or something. So I think it can also be really cool if you get to that point with your player, again, depending on what level they're at and age, to really find does this unique player need that's really going to maximize their potential in this moment, rather than just having the same approach to everyone, which also might not be ideal, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And I think also we need to spend time and the NBA staffs now are 12, 14 assistant coaches at some places, including G League coaches, all the player development coaches we have. Those people, they want to participate, they want to help, and they can say things to really help the player, or they can really say things to hurt the player and saying like they think that performances is based only on if you're making shots. where there's so much more player development. I had this talk with a coach yesterday, and I said, what's your player development program? Well, we really work with our guys on all these things. And I said, no, all you do is work on offense. There's so much, there's usually about 36 for a player that played 40 minutes in a game, or if a Scotty Barnes plays 36 minutes, about 32 minutes, he doesn't even have the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So much of their game is dependent on defense, rebounding, passing, setting screens. That's as important as step back jumpers, and the dribble moves you might teach them. There's so much more, and developing the mental part of the game is is maybe more important than
Right.
even the step back jumper that you worked on all summer. And so I think the big thing is we have to coach our coaches, not just the head coach and the top assistants, but everyone that's touching people, that are touching our players. They also, so if you were in a high school program, your junior varsity, your freshman coaches, the ones that are touching them at an early age can sometimes develop them or ruin them.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I think it's like when I think of, my role in particular, like we said, there's the one-on-one level. There's also, what am I helping influence from the organization as a whole, but also the team level, right? I really appreciate being able to be in our coaches' meetings. And
That's
so
good.
So when I'm in those meetings, that's part of my role. It's more of like a consultative role in those moments, that if something does come up and I have the ability to kind of share my perspective, or a coach in that meeting might come to me individually after and want to continue talking about something, or has a question about something. So that's been huge for me in developing my relationship with the coaches. And then we are kind of trying to get everyone on the same page again. And when we're messaging about certain things, we're doing it in front of everyone. And so we're all on the same page with that, which I think is great.
The Raptors are a very, very young team by NBA standards. And so you have a lot of Gen Z players, okay?
Yeah.
Right? And they're totally different than the millennials, okay? So when they're working with players, do you specifically go into ways that will help learning at that age, that developmental stage for them? Do you go into that? Because a lot of coaches aren't trained in how to work with Gen Z's athletes or students.
Yeah. And I try honestly not to get too caught up in some of that, because we don't have some clear evidence and data that there's like these dramatic differences in how we have to coach. I think sometimes it's just, again, building a relationship and meeting with them where they're at with what's important to them.
Got it.
Obviously they are more involved with technology and on their phones and things like that. So if there's a way to kind of meet them halfway with understanding just what did they grow up with and what are they used to, what are they accustomed to, helping kind of like speak more to their language and kind of cultural norms, I guess, if that makes sense. But we do know from Gen Z, like they do really value relationships with their coaches.
Yes.
And they have a tendency to be a little bit more perfectionistic. So again, can we really help be proactive with that relationship and be proactive with putting things in place in practice where you want to challenge them, where the chance of making a mistake is actually kind of high. So they actually have to get comfortable with the idea of making mistakes, knowing that they're actually growing outside of their comfort zone with the more challenge you're putting into your practice, so that that'll show up in the game, that they'll actually be a lot more successful. So I think that's interesting too. When we said aligning your messaging with what actually happens, if we're saying, we want you to take a risk and we want process over outcome, when a mistake happens, are you getting on someone in a practice, or are you saying, hey, great attempt, we're going to keep doing this until you get it, to show that this is a process versus I expect you to be perfect and get it right the first time?
What a great segue. So you talk about process over outcome, which I'm a huge believer in. Explain to coaches that don't understand the process. The process is not the game. It's the practice.
Yes.
And I even break it down further. I have players all the time, and we have it in the league where we now have basically 18 players under contract, including the 3 two-way contracts. So basically you have 18 players that all want to play.
Right.
And we used to always say, every player wants to play 48 minutes and every player wants 20 shots. That's what we used. That was our saying with our players with the Pistons. And that's not possible. Okay. And now that was with 12 players on the team and no two ways. So now when you're dealing with this, and I had players that were my sixth man, and he would be pissed off that he wasn't starting over the other two guards who happened to end up being Hall of Fame guards.
Right.
And he was pissed off he wasn't playing over them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was unconditional. What do we call it? I was kind of, I didn't know I was kind of like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I took a shot at it. And, and I said to him, the process for you is I want you to practice like every practice was your game. We practice more than we do now. Okay. We didn't take a day off if we, played a game like a day
Sure.
before, we practiced.
Yep.
And I would say, I want you to treat practices like your game and compete against them. And then I broke it down even further and said, make every possession offensively and defensively count. Just because you might have 20 possessions in a game or 40 or 50 possessions in a game on defense, but you don't worry about it if a guy scores on you 10 or 15 times. You have to value every possession to get better.
Right.
How do you break it down to help them understand? Because some of them, the outcome is I'm starting.
Right.
That's all that matters. I started. Okay. And I'm playing, 32 minutes. So I'm, but,
right.
But how about the players that are trying to get on the floor? What tips do you give them to encourage them?
I think that's great. Again, I'll bring it back to like our
Sure.
organization in particular,
Yeah,
which I think, again, just the way we set up our environment is just so helpful for so many of these things to like naturally kind of fall into place. So with the Raptors, we actually have a development plan for every player. It doesn't matter if you're 39-year-old Garrett Temple or if you're our latest draft pick, like everyone has a development plan from a holistic perspective. So you have basketball goals on the plan, you have nutrition goals, you have weight room goals, you have mental goals, you have off-court goals with what you're doing with your branding and appearances and that kind of stuff. So it's very holistic.
Great.
And we set them at the beginning, and then we check in after every 20 games with everyone who is kind of the leader of that area of your goal. So it's a very like collaborative treatment team kind of approach with each player where they feel like these are all the people in my corner wanting me to get better on a regular basis. So I think, players do like numbers and they like seeing improvements and things like that. So they like seeing how things are going on their goal plan. And it gives them those very specific things to be focusing on a regular basis. Like if I'm working on my offensive rebounding, like in practice, where's that going to show up in a game? Where's that going to show up? And so to your point, process is really breaking it down. What are those things in your control? Whether it's individual goals, but also as a team, what are our pillars offensively and defensively, the things that we're trying to accomplish that are part of our system, are part of our culture, so that in practice, we can be doing it as a collective as well. So if we, did a drill where we're trying to get a bunch of deflections or something, if the team as a collective is getting a bunch in that drill, they can feel like we executed our process well in that drill.
Right.
And we still got an outcome, right? But the idea is it's not that an outcome's not important, but we can't always control the outcome because you can't always control the team you're playing against or the refs or whatever. But can you at least walk away from a practice, a drill, a game feeling like we did a lot of what we had control over in a great way? And so you just need to know what are those things that we can look at to show that we're making progress. Like Darko talks about 1% better every day. Those are kinds of the messaging that we use to help guys still feel motivated, that we can see that we are moving forward. Even if we lost a couple games in a row, can we look back at our pillars and see, well, we actually did a decent job rebounding or with our ball pressure. Even if we lost the game, we can still find something within that we can still build off of. And again, I think that helps with motivation and just continuing to put in the work day in and day out.
Are you a believer in a neutral mindset of not get, it sounds like it, but not getting too high and getting too low, so you get those kind of things?
Yeah, I'm very much a believer in using your emotions as communication tools. So acknowledging them, but yeah, not getting like overly stuck in one or the other.
Right.
So, I mean, happiness is telling you that something went well, so let's keep doing it, right? but
Sure.
but
Absolutely.
and frustration is telling you that something's getting in your way. So how do you refocus on your goals to try and make sure that it doesn't continue getting in your way, you know? So I try and help our guys lean into their emotions in an acknowledging and use it as you move forward kind of way without getting kind of stuck in it one way.
I love that. That's good. I learned about 10 things so far. So this is awesome for me. No, seriously, you're coaching me. I love that. Instead of coaching you, you're coaching me. Dayna, tell me this as a takeaway to our listeners. And we have from NBA head coaches that listen to coaches in the Euro League that listen,
Mm-hmm.
some of the best high school and college coaches. Give them the exercise that you did out in Vegas at our coaching you, which I thought was spectacular, of something that they can work with their players. Because I, even with my 2 children now, who I've been coaching for years, I try my conversations with them now. They get very mundane when I go, how is your day? How are you doing?
Right.
And both of them being super smart kids they give me this profound answer of, okay, and that's
Right.
it. And
Right.
and I want to talk to them for 20 minutes, and I'm done in like 30 seconds, and I'm going to go, what the hell? I blew that one.
Sure.
How do you best go into those relationship conversations?
Yeah, I think, you know, what we were talking about in Vegas was what we've talked about on here is number one, what am I just doing to build those initial relationships and having conversations? But what we really honed in on in Vegas as well was how do I approach a conversation where maybe I'm seeing something in my athlete and I want to maybe bring it up with them? I know that it gets tricky sometimes because coaches or even just other staff members, support staff, sometimes worry about, you know, am I going to say the wrong thing? Um, should I say something? Should I not? And so I think what we did was we just brought up a scenario and asked folks to reflect on, you know, how would you approach this situation? Um, and so I think it goes back to using your expertise of noticing when someone might be quote unquote off. I think, you know, from a body language observation kind of perspective, as you get to know your players, you're probably going to know how they typically appear, their typical behaviors. And so if you're noticing that someone is starting to act a little bit differently, maybe they're being late to things, they're interacting differently with their teammates, they're interacting differently with you. I think I just posed it to the group of, you know, how would you start that conversation? So just thinking through, I don't think there's a right or a wrong
Right.
necessarily, whether you want to have it a formal meeting or not. But I think just remembering to open up a conversation from a place of caring, you know, being able to just speak to things that you've noticed from a fact-based perspective, just labeling behaviors without jumping to conclusions about assuming things from the behavior. I know sometimes that we can do that naturally as humans, but we forget that a lot of body language doesn't necessarily mean what we think it could mean. So, you know, having an open-ended questions, conversation, kind of seeing what your athlete might give you in that moment, even just checking in on like, hey, I'm noticing, you know, X, Y, and Z. Just want to check in with how you're doing. And kind of seeing where the conversation goes. I think we forget sometimes that being an active listener is a huge intervention in itself. You don't necessarily need to fix something. You don't necessarily need to feel that pressure to like do something in that moment. But maybe the athlete has been sitting with something that they haven't talked to anyone about. And this could be the first interaction and the first time that they do that. And they could feel really appreciative of the fact that you opened up that opportunity for them and potentially makes your relationship grow even stronger in the ability to connect in that moment.
I think in today's world, so many of the things that are on players, men or women, boys or girls, has nothing to do with the sport they're playing.
Right.
many of it's off the court, off the field problems. I really do. And that leads to the way you perform on the court. And I think that's so, so important. But, I just think this is a fascinating area. And I think what you're doing is incredible. I applaud the Raptors and every team at the college and pro level that's doing it. We can't have enough people like yourself in that space. So thank you so much for. I just know that this is one of my favorite sessions because I just think it's all about coaching people. Basketball, football has nothing to ice hockey. It's about the people that are playing it.
Right.
That's the whole key. So thanks for sharing.
Absolutely, Brendan. And I don't remember if you remember, but Pat Delaney, I love how he stole one of my favorite quotes in Vegas when he said, people really don't care how much you know until they know that you care, right? And I think that's just great for all of us to keep in the forefront of our mind with our players. Like, we can have the greatest schemes, the greatest drills, all those kinds of things, but if we don't really prioritize that relationship from the start, I think it's only going to get us so far.
That's a 3-point dunk. 3-point. That's an ending that you can't put past. That is awesome. I love that. Pat is a great friend, a great coach. You have great people up there, and I'm just so happy you were able to share time with our people today. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Brendan, and thanks so much for having someone like me on the show to just, again, speak to the holistic nature of what we're doing with our athletes. So thanks so much.
Come back and I want you to come back and join us because you're going to have a lot of stories to tell.
I love it.
Appreciate it, Dayna. Thanks.
Alrighty, take care.